Just where I'm living these days.
Just so you know, everyone, we are on the air. Just so you know. So they can't see you, so you have to come over here, Peter. So our next reader will be Peter, and then we will have Gary Phillips, and then we will have Lena Cole Dennis. Take a seat. Introduce yourself. People know who you are.
Okay, okay. Peter J. Harris is my name. I'm reading from chapter 10. Their eyes were watching God, Zora Neale Hurston. One day, Hezekiah asked off from work to go off with them with the ball team. Janie told him not to hurry back. She could close up the store herself this once. He cautioned her about the catches on the windows and the doors and swaggered off to Winter Park. Business was dull all day because numbers of people had gone to the game. She decided to close early because it was hardly worth the trouble of keeping open on an afternoon like this. She had set 6 o'clock as her limit. At 5:30, a tall man came into the place. Janie was leaning on the counter, making aimless pencil marks on a piece of wrapping paper. She knew she didn't know his name, but he looked familiar. "Good evening, Miss Starks," he said, with a sly grin, as if they had a good joke together. She was in favor of the story that was making him laugh before she even heard it. "Good evening," she answered pleasantly. "You got all the advantage because I don't know your name. People wouldn't know me like they would you. I guess standing in the store do make a person get to be known in the vicinity. Look like I done seen you somewhere." "Oh, I don't live no further than Orlando. I'm easy to see on Church Street most any day or night. You got any smoking tobacco?" She opened the glass case. "What kind?" "Camels." She handed over the cigarettes and took the money. He broke the pack and thrust one between his full purple lips. "You got a little piece of fire over there, lady?" They both laughed, and she handed him 2 kitchen matches out of a box for that purpose. It was time for him to go, but he didn't. He leaned on the counter with one elbow and cold cocked her a look. "Why ain't you at the ball game, too? Everybody else is there." "Well, I see somebody else besides me ain't there. I just sold some cigarettes." They laughed again. "That's because I'm dumb. I got the thing all mixed up. I thought the game was going to be out at Hungerford. So I got a ride to where this road turns off from the Dixie Highway and walked over here. And then I found out the game is in Winter Park." That was funny to both of them, too. "So what you going to do now? All the cars in Eatonville is gone. How about playing you some checkers? You looks hard to beat." "I is, cause I can't play a lick." "You don't cherish the game then?" "Yes, I do. And then again, I don't know whether I do or not, cause nobody ain't never showed me how." This is the last day for that excuse. "You got a board round here?" "Yes, indeed. The men folks treasures the game round here. I just ain't never learned how." He set it up and began to show her, and she found herself glowing inside. Somebody wanted her to play. Somebody thought it natural for her to play. That was even nice. She looked him over and got little thrills from every one of his good points. Those full, lazy eyes with the lashes curling sharply away like drawn scimitars. The lean, over-padded shoulders and narrow waist, even nice. He was jumping her king. She screamed in protest against losing the king she had had such a hard time acquiring. Before she knew it, she had grabbed his hand to stop him. He struggled gallantly to free himself. That is, he struggled, but not hard enough to wrench a lady's fingers. I got a right to take it. You left it right in my way. Yeah, but I was looking off when you went and stuck your men right up next to mine. No fair. You ain't supposed to look off, Miss Starks. It's the biggest part of the game to watch out. Leave go my hand. No, sir. Not my king. You can take another one, but not that one. They scrambled and upset the board and laughed at that. Anyhow, it's time for a Coca-Cola, he said. I'll come teach you some more another time. It's all right to come teach me, but don't come teach me. Don't come to cheat me. You can't beat a woman. It just won't stand for it. But I'll come teach you again. You're going to be a good player, too, after a while. You reckon so? What you doing? Hi, cat. All right. I like it when a cat, that means I must not be messing up too much. Yeah. Oh, well, the cat then threw me out. Let me start and say, you can't beat a woman. They just won't stand for it. But I'll come teach you again. You're going to be a good player, too, after a while. You reckon so? Jody used to tell me I would never learn. It was too heavy for my brains. Folks is playing it with sense, and folks is playing it without. But you got good meat on your head. You'll learn. Have a cool drink on me. Oh, all right, thank you. Got plenty of cold ones today. Nobody ain't been here to buy none. All gone off to the game. You ought to be at the next game. Tain't no use in you staying here if everybody else is gone. You don't buy from yourself, do you? You crazy thing. Of course I don't. But I'm worried about you a little. How come? Afraid I ain't going to pay for these drinks? Oh, no. How you going to get back home? Wait around here for a car? If none don't come, I got good shoe leather. Tain't but 7 miles no how. I could walk that in no time, easy. If it was me, I'd wait on the train. 7 miles is a kind of long walk. It would be for you because you ain't used to it. But I'm seeing women walk further than that. You could too if you had to do it. Maybe so. But I'll ride the train long as I got railroad fare. I don't need no pocket full of money to ride train like a woman. When I takes a notion, I rise anyhow, money or no money. Now ain't you something, Mr. You never did tell me what your name was. I sure didn't. Wasn't expecting it to be needed. The name my mama give me is Virgil Woods. They calls me Tea Cake for short. Tea Cake? So you sweet as all that? She laughed and he gave her a little cut-eye look to get her meaning. I may be guilty. You better try me and see. She did something halfway between a laugh and a frown, and he set his hat on straight. Believe I done cut a hog, so I guess I better catch air. He made an elaborate act of tipping to the door stealthily, then looked back at her with an irresistible grin on his face. Janie burst out laughing in spite of herself. You crazy thing. He turned and threw his hat at her feet. If she don't throw it at me, I'll take a chance on coming back, he announced, making gestures to indicate he was hidden behind a post. She picked up the hat and threw it after him with a laugh. Even if she had a brick, she wouldn't hurt you with it, he said to an invisible companion. The lady can't throw. He gestured to his companion, stepped out from behind the imaginary lamppost, set his coat and hat, and strolled back to where Janie was as if he had just come into the store. Evening, Miss Starks. Could you let me have a pound of knuckle pudding till Saturday? I'm sure to pay you then. You needs 10 pounds, Mr. TK. I'll let you have all bother about paying it back now. They joked and went on till the people began to come in. Then he took a seat and made talk and laughter with the rest until closing time. When everybody else had left, he said, I reckon I done overlaid my leaving time, but I figured you needed somebody to help you shut up. Since nobody else ain't around here, maybe I can get the job. Thank you, Mr. Tea Cake. It is kind of straining for me. Who ever heard of a tea cake being called Mr.? If you want to be real high tone and call me Mr. Woods, that's the way you feel about it. If you wants to be a little friendly and call me tea cake, that would be real nice. He was closing and bolting windows all the time he talked. All right then. Thank you, tea cake. How's that? Just like a little girl with her Easter dress on. Even nice. He locked the door and shook it to be sure and handed her the key. Come on now. I'll see you inside your door and get on down to Dixie. Janie was halfway down the palm-lined walk before she had a thought for her safety. Ooh, maybe this strange man was up to something. But it was no place to show her fear there in the darkness between the house and the store. He had hold of her arm, too. Then, in a minute, it was gone. Tea Cake wasn't strange. Seemed as if she had known him all her life. Look how she had been able to talk with him right off. He tipped his hat at the door and was off with the briefest good night. So she sat on the porch and watched the moon rise. Soon its amber fluid was drenching the earth and quenching the thirst of the day. Chapter 10. So, who's my... All right. That was wonderful. Let me pass it on to my brother.
Thank you.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, hi, I'm Gary Phillips, and I'm going to be reading the afterword to this fantastic book by Ms. Hurston, and it's called Zora Neale Hurston, A Negro Way of Saying. Oh, I guess I should hold the mic up. I'm sorry about that. I don't want to. I got to use my indoor voice. Oh, it's turning green. Am I talking too loud? Green is good. Red is bad. Okay, thank you. The Reverend Harry Middleton Hyatt, an Episcopal priest, whose 5-volume classic collection, Hoodoo, Conjuration, Witchcraft, and Root Work, more than amply returned an investment of 40 years research, once asked me during an interview in 1977 what had become of another eccentric collector whom he admired. I met her in the field in the 30s, I think, he reflected for a few seconds. That her first name was Zora. It was an innocent question made reasonable by the body of confused and often contradictory rumors that made Zora Neale Hurston's own legend as richly curious and as dense as are the black myths she did so much to present in her classic anthropological works, Mules and Men and Tell My Horse, and in her fiction. A graduate of Barnard, where she studied under Franz Boas, Zora Neale Hurston published 7 books, 4 novels, 2 books of folklore, and an autobiography, and more than 50 shorter works between the middle of the Harlem Renaissance and the end of the Korean War, when she was the dominant black woman writer in the United States. The dark obscurity into which her career then lapsed reflects her staunchly independent political stances rather than any deficiency of craft or vision. Virtually ignored after the early 50s, even by the Black arts movement in the 60s, an otherwise noisy and intense spell of Black image and myth making that rescued so many Black writers from remaindered oblivion, Hurston embodied a more or less harmonious, there we go, but nevertheless problematic unity of opposites. It is this complexity that refuses to lend itself to the glib categories of radical or conservative, black or Negro, revolutionary or Uncle Tom, categories of little use in literary criticism. It is this same complexity embodied in her fiction that, until Alice Walker published her important essay In Search of Zora Neale Hurston in Ms. Magazine in 1975, had made Hurston's place in Black literary history an ambiguous one at best. The rediscovery of Afro-American writers has usually turned on larger political criteria, of which the writer's work is supposedly a mere reflection. The deeply satisfying aspects of the rediscovery of Zora Neale Hurston is that Black women generated it primarily to establish a material literary ancestry. Alice Walker's moving essay recounts her attempts to find Hurston's unmarked grave in the Garden of the Heavenly Rest, a segregated cemetery in Fort Pierce, Florida. Hurston made a metaphor for the Black woman writer's search for tradition. The craft of Alice Walker, Gail Jones, Gloria Naylor, and Toni Cade Bambara bears, in markedly different ways, strong affinity with Hurston's. Their attention to Hurston's signify a novel sophistication in Black literature. They read Hurston not only for the spiritual kinship inherent in such relations, but because she used Black vernacular speech and rituals in ways subtle and various to chart and the coming consciousness of Black women, so glaringly absent in other Black fiction. The use of the vernacular became the fundamental framework for all but one of her novels, and is particularly effective in her classic work, Their Eyes Were Watching God, published in 1937, which is more closely related to Henry James's The Portrait of a Lady and Jess Toomer's Cain than to Langston Hughes's and Richard Wright's proletarian literature, so popular in the Depression. The charting of Janie Crawford's fulfillment as an autonomous imagination, Their Eyes, is a lyrical novel that correlates the need of her first two husbands for ownership of progressively larger physical space and the gaudy accomplishments of upward mobility with the suppression of self-awareness in their wife. Only with her third and last lover, a roustabout called Tea Cake, whose unconstructed frolics center around and about the Florida swamps, does Janie at her bloom, as does the larger pear tree that stands beside her grandmother's tiny log cabin. She saw dust bearing beasts sink into the sanction of a bloom. The thousand sister calyxes arch to meet the love embrace, and the ecstatic shiver at the tree from root to tiniest branch, creaming in every blossom and frothing with delight. So this was a marriage. To plot Janie's journey from object to subject, the narrative of the novel shifts from third to a blend of first and third person, known as free indirect discourse, signifying this awareness of self in Janie. Their Eyes is a bold feminist novel, the first to be explicitly so in the Afro-American tradition. Yet in its connection with the project of finding a voice, with language as its instrument of injury and salvation, of selfhood and empowerment, it suggests many of the themes that inspire Hurston's oeuvre as a whole. One of the most moving passages in American literature is Zora Neale Hurston's account of her last encounter with her dying mother, found in a chapter entitled Wandering in her autobiography, Dust Tracks on a Road, published in 1942. Here we go. As I crowded in, they lifted up the bed and turned it around so that Mama's eyes could face east. I thought that she looked to me as the head of the bed reversed. Her mouth was slightly open, but her breathing took up so much of her strength that she could not talk. But she looked at me, or so I felt, to speak for her. She depended on me for a voice. We can begin to understand rhetorical distance that separates Hurston from her contemporaries if we compare this passage with a similar scene published just 3 years later in Black Boy by Richard Wright. Hurston's dominant black male contemporary and rival, once in the night, my mother called me to her bed and told me that she could not endure the pain, that she wanted to die. I held her hand and begged her to be quiet. That night I ceased to react on my mother, but my feelings were frozen. If Hurston's represents her final moments with her mother in terms of the search for voice, then Wright attributes to a similar experience a certain somberness of spirit that I was never to lose, which grew into a symbol in my mind, gathering to itself the poverty, the ignorance, the helplessness. Few authors in the Black tradition have less in common than Zora Neale Hurston and Richard Wright. But whereas Wright could reign through the 40s as our predominant author, Hurston's fame reached its zenith in 1943 with a Saturday Review cover story honoring the success of Dust Tracks. Several years later, she would be serving as a maid in Revo Alto, Florida. 10 years after that, she would die in the county welfare home in Fort Pierce, Florida. How could the recipient of 2 Guggenheims and the author of 4 novels, a dozen short stories, 2 musicals, 2 books on Black mythology, dozens of essays, and a prize-winning autobiography virtually disappear from her readership for 3 full decades? There are no easy answers to this quandary, despite the concerted attempts of scholars to resolve it. It is clear, however, that the loving, diverse, and enthusiastic responses that Hurston's work engenders today were not shared by several of her influential Black male contemporaries. The reasons for this are complex and stem largely from what we might think of as that racial ideologies. Part of Hurston's received heritage, and perhaps the paramount received notion that links the novel of manners in the Harlem Renaissance, the social realism of the 30s, and the cultural nationalism of the Black arts movement was the idea that racism also had reduced Black people to mere ciphers, to beings who only react to an omnipresent racial oppression, whose culture is deprived, who are different, and whose psyches are in the main pathological. Albert Murray, the writer and social critic, calls this the social science fiction monster. Socialists, separatists, and civil rights advocates alike have been devoured by this beast. Hurston's thought this idea degrading, its propagation a trap, and railed against it. It was, she said, upheld by the sobbing school of Negrohood, who hold that nature somewhat has given them a dirty deal. Unlike Hughes and Wright, Hurston, who's chose deliberately to ignore this dirty deal. Oh, I'm sorry, to deliberately ignore this picture that distorted. Freedom, she wrote in Moses, Man of the Mountain, was something eternal. The man himself must make his own emancipation. And she decided her first novel, a manifesto against the arrogance of whites, assuming that Black lives are only defensive reactions to white actions. Her strategy was not calculated to please. Well, wait, did I just skip? No. her actions were not calculated to please. What she might think of as Hurston's myths, realisms, lush and dense within a lyrical Black idiom, seemed politically retrograde to the proponents of a social or critical realism. If Wright, Ellison, Brown, and Hurston were engaged in a battle over ideal fictional modes with which to represent the Negro, clearly Hurston lost the battle, but not the war. After Hurston and her choice of style for the Black novel were silenced or for nearly 3 decades, what we have witnessed since is clearly marvelous instance of the return of the repressed. For Zora Neale Hurston has been rediscovered in a manner unprecedented in the Black tradition. Several Black women writers, among whom are some of the most accomplished writers in America today, have openly turned to her works as sources of narrative strategies to be repeated, imitated, and revised in acts of textual bonding. Responding to Wright's critique, Hurston claimed that she had wanted to, at long last, to write a Black novel and not a treatise on sociology. It is this urge that resonates in Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon and Beloved, Anna Walker's depiction of Hurston as our prime symbol of racial health, a sense of Black people as complete, complex, undiminished human beings, a sense that is lacking in so much Black writing and literature. In a tradition in which male authors have ardently denied Black literary paternity, this is a major development, one of the heralds, the refinements of our notions of tradition. Zora and her daughters are a tradition within the tradition, a Black woman's voice. The resurgence of popular and academic readerships of Hurston's works signifies her multiple canonization in the Black, the American, and the feminist traditions. Within the critical establishment, scholars of every stripe have found in Hurston texts for all seasons. People have read Hurston's works since 1975 and did between the date and the publication of her first novel in 1934. Rereading Hurston, I am always struck by the density of intimate experiences she cloaked in richly elaborate imagery. It is this concern for the figurative capacity of Black language, for what a character in Mules and Men calls a hidden meaning, just like the Bible, the inside meaning of words, that unites Hurston's anthropological studies with her fiction. For the folklore Hurston collected so meticulously as France Boas's student at Barnard became metaphor, allegories, and performances in her novels, the traditional reoccurring canonical metaphor of Black culture. Always more of a novelist than a social scientist, even Hurston's academic collections center on the quality of imagination makes these lives whole and splendid. But it's in the novel that Hurston's use of the Black idiom realizes its fullest effect. In Jonah's Gourd Vine, her first novel, for instance, The Errant Preacher, John, as described by Robert Hemingway as a poet who graces the world with language but cannot find the words to secure his own personal grace. This concern for language and for the natural poets who bring barbaric splendor of word and song into the very camp of the mockers not only connects her two disciplines, but also makes of the suspected linguistic moment a thing to behold indeed. Invariably, Hurston's writing depends for its strength on the text, not the context, as does John's climactic sermon, a tour de force of Black image and metaphor. Image and metaphor define John's world. His failure to interpret himself leads finally to the self-destruction. As Robert Hemingway, Hurston's biographer, concludes, such passages eventually add up to a theory of language and behavior. Using the spyglass of anthropology, her work celebrates rather than moralizes. It shows rather than tells, such that both behavior and art become self-evident as the tale text and hoodoo rituals accrete during the reading. As author, she functions as a midwife, participating in the birth of a body of folklore and first wondering contacts with natural law. The myths she describes so accurately are, in fact, alternative modes for perceiving reality, and never just considering depictions of the quaint. Hurston sees the dozens, for example, that age-old Black ritual of graceful insult as, among other things, a verbal defense of the sanctity of the family, conjured through ingenious plays on words. Though attacked by Wright and virtually ignored by his literary heirs, Hurston's ideas about language and craft undergird many of the most successful comments to the American literature that followed. We can understand that Hurston's complex and contradictory legacy more fully as we examine their dust tracks on a road, her own conversational account of her life. Hurston did make significant parts of herself up, like a masquerader putting on a disguise for the ball, like a character in a fiction. In this way, Hurston wrote herself and sought in her works to rewrite the self of the race in its several private and public guises, largely for ideological reasons. That which she chose to reveal is this life of her imagination, as it sought to mold and interpret her environment. That which she silenced or deletes, similarly, is all that her readership would draw upon in delinquent or pigeonhole her life as a, oh, here's a good word, syndicacy of the race problem, as exceptional parts standing for the debased whole. Hurston's achievement in Dust Tracks is twofold. First, she gives us a writer's life rather than an account, as she says, of the Negro problem. So many events in the text are figured in terms of Hurston's growing awareness and mastery of books and language and linguistic rituals, as spoken and written both in masters of the Western tradition and by ordinary members of the Black community. These two speech commentaries are in fact Hurston's great sources of inspiration, not only in her novels but also in her autobiography. The representation of her sources of language seemed to be her principal concern, as she constantly shifts back and forth between her literature narrative's voice and a highly idiomatic Black voice found in wonderful passages of free indirect discourse. Hurston moves in and out of these distinct voices effortlessly, seamlessly, just as she does in Their Eyes to chart Janie's coming to consciousness. It is this use of the divided voice, a double voice unreconstructed, that strikes me as her great achievement, a verbal analog of her double experiences as a woman in a male-dominated world and as a Black person in a non-Black world, a woman writer's revision of W.E.B. Du Bois's metaphor of double consciousness for the hyphenated African Americans. Her language, variegated by the twin voices that intertwine throughout the text, retains the power to unsettle. There is something about poverty that smells like death. Dead dreams dropping off the heart like leaves in a dry season and rotting around the feet. Impulses smothered too long in the fetid air of underground caves. The soul lives in a sickly air. People can be slave ships in shoes. Elsewhere, she analyzes Black idioms used by a culture raised on simile and invective. They know how to call names, she concludes, then list some, such as gator mouth, box ankled, puzzle gutted, shovel footed, eyes looking like skin Jenny nuts, and mouth looking like a disshapen full of broke up crockery. Immediately following the passage about her mother's death, she writes, "The master maker of his making had made old Death, made him with big, soft feet and square toes, made him with a face that reflects the face of all things, but neither changes itself, nor is mirrored anywhere, made the body of death out of infinite hunger, made a weapon of his hand to satisfy his needs. This is the morning of the day of the beginning of things." Language in these passages is not entirely andriomatic, as Hurston described a key Black linguistic particular. Rather, manner and meaning are perfectly in tune. She says the thing in the most meaningful manner, nor is she being cute or pandering to a condescending white readership. She is naming emotions, as she says, in a language both deeply personal and culturally specific. The second reason that Dusk Tracks succeeds as literary arises from the first Hurston's unresolved tensions between her double voices signifies her full understanding of modernism. Hurston uses the two voices in her text to celebrate the psychological fragmentation both of modernity and of the Black American. As Barbara Johnson has written, hers is a rhetoric of division, rather than a fiction of psychological or cultural unity. Zora Neale Hurston, the real Zora Neale Hurston that we long to locate in this text, dwells on the silence that separates these two voices. She is both and neither, bilingual and mute. The strategy helps to explain her attention to so many contemporary critics and writers who can turn to her works again and again, only to be startled by her remarkable artistry. But the life that Hurston would write was not the life she could live. In fact, Hurston's life, so much more readily than does the standard sociological rendering, reveals how economic limits determine our characters, our choices, even more than does violence or love. Put simply, Hurston wrote well when she was comfortable, wrote poorly when she was not. Financial problems, book sales, grants, and fellowships, too few and too paltry, ignorant editors, and a smothering patron produce the sort of dependence that affects, if not determines, her style, a relation she explored somewhat ironically in what white publishers won't print. We cannot oversimplify the relationship between Hurston's art and her life, nor can we reduce the complexities of her post-war politics, which, rooted in her distaste for the pathological image of blacks, were markedly conservative and Republican. Nor can we sentimentalize. Wait a minute. I will say it again. Nor can we sentimentalize. There we go. Her disastrous final decade, when she found herself working as a maid on the very day the Saturday Evening Post published her short story, Conscience of the Court, and often found herself without money, surviving after 1957 on unemployment benefits, substitute teaching, and welfare checks. In her last days, Hemingway concludes dispassionately, Zora lived a difficult life, alone, proud, ill, obsessed with a book she could not finish. The excavation of her buried life helped a new generation read Hurston again. But ultimately, we must find Hurston's legacy in her art, where she plowed up some literacy and laid by some alphabets. Her important her importance rests with the legacy of fiction and lore she constructed so cannily. As Hurston herself noted, roll your eyes in ecstasy and ape his every move. But until we have placed something upon his street corner that is our own, we are right back where we were when we filed our iron collar off. If, as a friend eulogized, she didn't come to you empty, then she does not leave Black literature empty. If her earlier obscurity and negligence today seem unconceivable, perhaps now, as as she wrote of Moses, she has crossed over. Thank you. You're up. Yes.
Lord, what are we gonna do about the lighting?
Is it two? Is it two? Take a seat. Is it two? Is it two?
That's what I'm gonna try to see.
Yeah, you got to shift for the light.
Do you see?
Oh, that's what I'm trying to do, babe.
Okay.
You know, it takes me a minute.
Okay.
Okay, I think I could do it.
Let me see if I can find another light.
Find my light. Hi. maybe that's it. Hello, my name is Lena Cole Dennis, and I'm reading chapter 1. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. For some, they come in with the tide. For others, they sail forever on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing until the watcher turns his eyes away in resignation, his dreams mocked to death by time. That is the life of man. Now, women forget all those things they don't want to remember and remember everything they don't want to forget. The dream is the truth. Then they act and do things accordingly. So, the beginning of this was a woman, and she had come back from burying the dead. Not the dead of sick and ailing, with friends at the pillow and the feet. She had some back from the sodden and the bloated, the sudden dead, their eyes flung wide open in judgment. The people all saw her come because it was sundown. The sun was gone, but he had left his footprints in the sky. It was the time for sitting on porches beside the road. It was the time to hear things and talk. These sitters had been tongueless, earless, eyeless, conveniences all day long. Mules and other brutes had occupied their skin, but now the sun and the boss man were gone, so the skins felt powerful and human. They became lords of sounds and lesser things. They passed nations through their mouths. They sat in judgment. Seeing the woman as she was made them remember the envy they had stored up from other times. So they chewed up the back parts of their minds and swallowed with relish. They made burning statements with questions and killing tools out of laughs. It was mass cruelty, a mood come alive, words walking without masters, walking all together like harmony in a song. What's she doing coming back here in them overalls? Can't she find no dress to put on? Where is that blue satin dress she left here in? Where all that money her husband and took and died and left her? What that old 40-year-old woman doing with her hair swinging down her back like some young gal? Where she left that young lad of a boy she went off here with? Thought she was going to marry. Where he left her? What he done with her money? Bet you he cut with some gal so young she ain't even got no hairs. Why she don't stay in her class? When she got to where they were, she turned her face on the bander log and spoke. They rambled a noisy good evening and left her mouth setting that left their mouths setting open and their ears full of hope. Her speech was pleasant enough, but she kept walking straight on to her gate. The porch couldn't talk for looking. The men noticed her firm buttocks like she had grapefruits in her hip pockets. The great rope of black hair swinging to her waist and unraveling in the wind like a plume. Then her pugnacious breasts trying to bore holes in her shirt. They, the men, were saving with their minds what they lost with the eye. The women took the faded shirt and muddy overalls and laid them away for remembrance. It was a weapon against her strength, and it turned out of no significance. Still, it was a hope that she might fall to their level someday. But nobody moved, nobody spoke. Nobody even thought to swallow spit until her gate slammed behind her. Pearl Stone opened her mouth and laughed real hard because she didn't know and sucked her teeth. Huh. Y'all let her worry you? You ain't like me. I ain't got her to study about. If she ain't got manners enough to stop and let folks know how she been making out, let her go on. She ain't even worth talking after. Lula Moss drawl through her nose. She sits high, but she looks low. That's what I'm say about these old women running after young boys. Phoebe Watson hitched her rocking chair forward before she spoke. Well, nobody don't know nothing. Well, nobody don't know if it's anything to tell or not. Me, I'm her best friend, and I don't know. Maybe us don't know into things like you do, but we all know how she went way from here, and us sure seen her come back. Tain't no use in your trying to cloak no old woman like Janie Starks. Phoebe, friend or no friend. At that, she ain't no old, and some of y'all that's talking, she way past 40 to my knowledge, Phoebe. No more than 40 and on at the outside. She way too old for a boy like Tea Cake. Tea Cake ain't been no boy for some time. He's round 30 his own self. Don't care what it was, she could stop and say a few words with us. She act like we don't done something to her. Pearl Stone complained. She the one been doing wrong. You mean you mad because she didn't stop and tell us all her business?